Uh-oh. End of the line.
The late 90s were a wild time in gaming history. With the push towards 3D games as the standard, classic genres that were more known for their 2D gameplay were being dragged by their feet into an entirely new polygonal direction. At the center of this transition was a bizarre PlayStation 1 game called Fighting Force, Core Design's attempt at reimagining side-scrolling beat-em-ups as we knew them. The developer was riding a massive wave of success after Tomb Raider took the world by storm, and so naturally, expectations were pretty high. Could this be the new, exciting take on classic brawlers, the likes of Final Fight and perhaps more notably Streets of Rage that players had been waiting for? I place emphasis on Streets of Rage, not to take away from the greatness of Final Fight, but rather to highlight the fact that Fighting Force was originally pitched as a fourth entry in the series, which Sega did pass on. Upon release, the game was met with mixed emotions. Some players praised the destructible environments, simple gameplay, and 3D visuals, while critics found it a bit rough around the edges with stiff controls, lackluster level designs, and little innovation to be found. The game did find an audience in the end and even received a Nintendo 64 port, managing to sell over 1 million copies and ultimately getting a sequel. A very strange sequel, but a follow-up nonetheless. It's been decades since Fighting Force originally released, but now it's back in a brand new collection from Limited Run Games, bringing this retro relic to modern platforms for the first time. But should Fighting Force 1 and 2 have stayed in the past? Or do these games still have something to say in this new era of gaming? Why don't we find out in our full review? Hey, real quick, support real people that make real things over at patreon.com/idreamofindiegames, where your new indie gaming community is waiting for you. The Fighting Force collection gathers both Fighting Force 1 and 2 into one singular collection without many bells and whistles, and for better or worse, mostly leaves these games as they were. A few visual updates have been made, such as upscaling and CRT filters, but these serve to only lightly paint over what are still ultimately very old, blocky releases that, like many PS1-era games, haven't aged incredibly well, visually anyways, and in other ways. Players will also be treated to a very basic art gallery along with the ability to save and rewind their gameplay. But other than that, this is a no-frills release that is mostly bare bones. Not much of a celebration of the history of these games, if you ask me. Players are given a few different control options, but there's no escaping how clunky and downright painful both games can feel to play, particularly Fighting Force 2. At the least, frame rates have been improved for these releases, alleviating at least a small amount of the pain of playing these games, which never felt all that mechanically sound to begin with, in my opinion. Let's first discuss the original Fighting Force, which is indeed a 3D brawler for up to 2 players that allows gamers to select between 4 different characters. You have Hawk, Mace, Elena, and Ben that all play a bit differently from one another, with Hawk being quite powerful, Mace being a bit faster, Ben your usual brute brawler, and Elena having quick kicks that don't deal out very much damage. They are all equipped with a special move that, as fans of the genre likely would expect, costs a small portion of health to use. On their quest to stop the evil Dr. Dex Zhang, they'll encounter no shortage of goons whom they'll need to punch, kick, grapple, and toss across 22 levels featuring various destructible objects. There's a few weapons to be grabbed along the way as well, which can batter foes into oblivion. This version of the game sadly does not include an online mode. When playing Fighting Force today, context is definitely important. This game wasn't amazing to play even in its heyday, but it certainly feels markedly worse in 2026. One could argue that limited run games could have gone the extra mile in making these games feel far more playable than they are, but this would come at the cost of upsetting purists that want the original experience mostly preserved. It's a tricky situation to navigate, but important to understand just what you're buying here. Fighting Force is an old game. It looks old. It feels old and unresponsive. Its levels are bland and boring. Its graphics are laughable in spots, though not without some charm, and it doesn't sound great either. Thus, it's a game for fans of the original that want to support a modern re-release, and really nobody else. Fighting Force 2, on the other hand, well, even when viewed through the lens of nostalgia, it's just a really bad game. I understand that stealth action games were big in this era, just look at Metal Gear Solid and Siphon Filter as examples, but sadly, Fighting Force 2 is rather pale in comparison. The game pivots away from its brawler roots to some degree, offering more of a single-player action experience where you play as Hawk and Hawk only, and explore blocky, lifeless environments, bashing enemies who feature atrocious AI while collecting up key cards to advance further into the game. The controls are somehow even worse than the original game, with a god-awful camera, platforming sections that are miserable to get through, and really, this is barely a functioning video game at all that should have been left in the past, as it did ultimately kill off this franchise, leading to the cancellation of a planned third game. If it weren't for cheat codes, I'm not sure I would have even been able to get through the second level. It's that annoying. And so, with the Fighting Force collection, you're really buying one somewhat playable game and an absolutely miserable one with very few improvements over the original. It lacks in extras, and basically, limited run games seems to be banking on nostalgia to carry the way. The reality is, nostalgia only gets you so far. With some developer interviews, cool bonus features, or actual tangible improvements made to the gameplay of these releases, Fighting Force Collection could have been a cool piece of gaming history that was worth owning. But as it stands, you don't gain much by having these two games on newer hardware if you've already played them or have physical copies of the originals. Some things are just better left in the past. At I Dream of Indie Games, we do believe that games are so much more than a number. That's why we have our Genie Lamp tier system. You want to avoid that dreaded Indie Krampus at all costs, but we go all the way up to the elusive Golden Genie Lamp of Approval. And because one of these games barely functions as a video game, though is playable, this isn't quite Krampus level, but nostalgia aside, I am going to have to award this one the Broken Lamp.